What would you do if every doctor told you your child would never walk? Never run to greet you at the door? Never kick a soccer ball or dance at his wedding? How would you feel knowing your son will spend his entire life trapped in wheelchairs while other kids live the childhood he'll never have? The medical team was merciless in their verdict. Tommy Hartwell's spina bifida meant no feeling, no movement, no hope of ever standing on his own 2 feet. His billionaire father, Benjamin Hartwell, had spent 3 agonizing, heartbreaking years accepting this reality and drowning his guilt in business trips. But everything shattered on one impossible Friday. That Friday became legendary because when Benjamin walked through his front door, he witnessed something that defied every medical chart. His permanently disabled son was taking actual steps toward the woman everyone called just the maid. Welcome back to Eva's Stories. I have missed you all so much. Thank you for sticking around with me. I truly appreciate your love and support. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's go back 3 days to when Lucia Montenegro first walked through the Hartwell family's front door. The elevator climbed 62 floors above downtown Seattle, carrying Benjamin Hartwell toward another day of avoiding what waited at home. Through the glass walls of Hartwell Technologies, the city spread below like a circuit board, all clean lines and profitable connections. Ben stood at his corner office window, phone pressed to his ear, negotiating a merger worth more than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. The Seoul office confirmed the numbers, he said into his headset, adjusting his navy blue tie. We close by Friday or we walk. His reflection stared back from the window, sharp jawline, tired green eyes, brown hair that cost $300 to cut every month. At 34, Ben had built an empire from code and caffeine, but success tasted like ash when he thought about what success had cost him. The framed photo on his desk showed a different man. That Ben smiled easily, holding a laughing woman with golden hair and kind eyes. Rebecca. 3 years dead from cancer, leaving behind a broken husband and a son born with spina bifida who would never run to greet his father at the door. Mr. Hartwell? Janet Cooper, his assistant, appeared in the doorway. Professional as always, her gray suit matched her no-nonsense expression. The car's waiting. Your flight to Denver leaves in 2 hours. Ben nodded without turning around. Another business trip. Another excuse to avoid going home to the medical equipment that cluttered his living room, the specialists who spoke in measured tones about realistic expectations, and his 3-year-old son who deserved better than a father drowning in guilt. Did you review the new housekeeper's credentials? Ben asked. Lucia Montenegro. 5 years experience, excellent references. She starts today while you're traveling. Perfect timing, Ben thought. He wouldn't have to see another stranger trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. The phone buzzed with an incoming call. Take messages, he told Janet, grabbing his leather briefcase. I'll handle everything from Denver. 3,000 miles away felt far enough to breathe. Meanwhile, across the city in a modest apartment complex near Pike Place Market, Lucia Montenegro finished braiding her long black hair and checked her reflection one final time. The yellow cotton dress was simple but clean, paired with comfortable white sneakers for a job that would keep her on her feet all day. At 28, Lucia carried herself with quiet confidence despite the skeptical looks her appearance often drew in wealthy neighborhoods. Her brown skin had weathered judgment before, but her hands, gentle and sure, had proven themselves capable of healing in ways that surprised everyone except her. She kissed the small silver cross at her throat, the same cross Roberto used to touch when he was scared. Her son would have been Tommy's age now if the accident hadn't stolen him away 2 years ago. Some mornings, the grief still crushed her lungs like deep water, but caring for other children had become her salvation. The bus ride to the Hartwell mansion took 45 minutes through Seattle's morning traffic. Lucia watched the city transform from her working-class neighborhood to the exclusive Magnolia district, where houses hid behind gates and money bought silence. The Hartwell estate sat on 2 acres overlooking Puget Sound. Modern architecture mixed with traditional elements, large windows, clean lines, but somehow cold despite its beauty. Lucia rang the doorbell, smoothing her dress one last time. Helen Foster opened the door, a middle-aged nurse with graying hair and kind but tired eyes. You must be Lucia. I'm Helen, Tommy's day nurse. Come in, let me show you around. The house felt more like a medical facility than a home. Wheelchair ramps led to every room. Specialized equipment lined the walls. Everything designed for efficiency, nothing for joy. Where's Tommy? Lucia asked, following Helen through rooms that echoed despite expensive furniture. Physical therapy session with Caroline in the back room. Poor little one works so hard. Helen's voice carried the weight of watching a child struggle daily. Dr. Vaughn has him on a strict schedule. Exercises, medications, treatments. Everything documented. They passed family photos showing happier times. A beautiful blonde woman holding a baby, the same woman with Ben at their wedding, laughing like they believed in forever. The recent photos showed only Ben in business settings. No family pictures on the walls anymore. Mr. Hartwell travels frequently for work, Helen explained, noticing Lucia's gaze. He provides everything Tommy needs medically. The best doctors, the latest equipment. Everything except himself, Lucia thought but didn't say. Through an open doorway, she glimpsed a small boy lying on a therapy table. Even from a distance, she could see his determination, the way he gritted his teeth during exercises, the fierce concentration in his dark eyes. Tommy Hartwell might be trapped in a body that couldn't walk, but his spirit burned bright. He looks strong, Lucia observed. Helen glanced at her with surprise. Most people's first reaction was pity. He is stronger than anyone realizes, I think. Caroline Reed, the physical therapist, emerged from the room carrying her equipment bag. Professional and efficient, she nodded to Lucia without much interest. Tommy's done for today. He needs rest before his afternoon session with Dr. Vaughn. How's his progress? Helen asked. Caroline's expression remained neutral. We're maintaining his current mobility range. The goal is preventing further deterioration, not improvement. His spinal condition makes walking impossible. Impossible. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Lucia watched Caroline pack her specialized equipment. Devices worth thousands of dollars designed to work around Tommy's limitations, not challenge them. Every piece of medical equipment in this house seemed to accept defeat as inevitable. I'd like to meet Tommy, Lucia said quietly. Helen looked uncertain. He's probably tired from therapy. Maybe wait until tomorrow. But Lucia was already moving toward the therapy room, drawn by an instinct stronger than protocol. She found Tommy lying on his side on the padded table, his small body exhausted but his eyes alert and watchful. He wore a red polo shirt and specially designed shorts that accommodated his leg braces. Hello, Tommy, she said softly, approaching slowly. I'm Lucia. I'll be helping take care of your house. Tommy studied her with intelligent brown eyes that seemed older than 3 years. He didn't speak. Helen had mentioned he was delayed in verbal development, another specialist concern, but something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Or hope. Lucia noticed how his legs moved slightly when he shifted position. Muscle weakness, yes, but not the complete paralysis everyone seemed to assume. His feet responded when she accidentally brushed against them while adjusting his pillow. You're a fighter, aren't you? She whispered, and Tommy's lips curved into the faintest smile. From the hallway, Helen called out. Mr. Hartwell's car just left for the airport. He'll be gone until Friday. 5 days. Lucia calculated. 5 days to observe, to understand, to see what everyone else was missing. As she tucked a soft blanket around Tommy's small form, her hands detected something the expensive equipment hadn't measured. Potential waiting for someone to believe in it. Rest now, little one, she murmured in Spanish, the language of her heart. But when you're ready, we'll see what you can really do. Tommy's eyes drifted closed, but his hand moved slightly toward her voice. Such a small movement, but in that gesture, Lucia glimpsed the miracle everyone had stopped looking for. The house fell quiet except for the sound of medical equipment humming its mechanical rhythms. But beneath that clinical noise, Lucia heard something else, the heartbeat of a child who refused to accept the limitations others placed on him. The sunrise painted Seattle's skyline in shades of gold and pink, but inside the Hartwell mansion, artificial light had already been burning for an hour. Lucia arrived at 6:30, her yellow dress replaced by practical blue jeans and a soft green sweater. She carried a small canvas bag containing items that would have puzzled the medical staff. Colorful scarves, smooth river stones, and a wooden flute her grandmother had carved decades ago in Mexico. Helen Foster greeted her at the door with a steaming cup of coffee and weary relief. "Thank goodness you're here early." Tommy was restless all night. He kept trying to pull himself up in his crib, making these little frustrated sounds. Dr. Vaughn says it's normal for children with his condition to attempt movements they can't complete. Lucia accepted the coffee, but her attention was already moving toward Tommy's room. "Has he eaten?" "Barely touched his breakfast. He's been like this since his father left. Won't engage with his toys, won't respond to the therapy exercises." Helen rubbed her temples. "Sometimes I wonder if he knows his father's avoiding him." The words hit Lucia like a physical blow. Children always knew. They felt abandonment in their bones long before they had words for the pain. Tommy sat in his specialized chair in the living room, staring out the large windows toward Puget Sound. His small body was strapped in according to medical protocol, every movement restricted for his supposed safety. The morning light caught the determination in his dark eyes, but also something else, loneliness so profound it made Lucia's chest ache. "Good morning, little warrior," she said softly, kneeling beside his chair. Tommy turned toward her voice, and for a moment his guarded expression softened. He didn't speak, but his right hand moved slightly in her direction. "You want to go outside, don't you?" Lucia observed, following his gaze to the windows. "All this beautiful sunshine, and you're trapped in here with machines." Helen appeared with Tommy's morning medications. "Dr. Vaughn's orders are very specific. Tommy needs controlled environment exposure only. His immune system is compromised, and his balance issues make outdoor activities dangerous." Lucia watched Helen administer the medications with clinical efficiency. Every action was documented, every response measured against expected norms. But where was the joy? Where was the wonder that should fill a 3-year-old's day? "What if we brought some outside in?" Lucia suggested carefully. "Nothing that violates medical protocols, just enrichment." Helen looked uncertain, but Caroline Reed's arrival interrupted the conversation. The physical therapist entered with her usual array of equipment, already setting up for Tommy's morning session. "Let's get started," Caroline announced, beginning to transfer Tommy from his chair to the therapy table. "We need to maintain his current range of motion." Lucia stepped back to observe, but what she saw troubled her deeply. Every exercise focused on accommodation rather than improvement. Caroline moved Tommy's legs through prescribed motions while he lay passive, his eyes distant and resigned. "His left leg shows good muscle tone," Lucia commented quietly. Caroline glanced at her with mild irritation. "Muscle tone doesn't translate to function in spina bifida cases. We're preventing contractures, not building strength for walking." "But what if?" "What if what?" Caroline's voice carried the authority of medical training. "His spinal defect prevents nerve signals from reaching his lower extremities properly. Walking isn't possible." Lucia watched Tommy's face during this exchange. His eyes flashed with something she recognized, the anger of being discussed like a problem to be managed rather than a person with potential. After Caroline finished the session and left, Lucia found herself alone with Tommy for the first time. Helen was updating medical charts in the kitchen, and the house felt different without the clinical presence of the therapist. "She doesn't see you, does she?" Lucia whispered, approaching Tommy where he lay on the therapy table. "None of them see who you really are." Tommy's eyes fixed on hers with startling intensity. In that gaze, Lucia saw intelligence, frustration, and something else, hope that someone might finally understand. Slowly, carefully, Lucia reached into her canvas bag and pulled out one of the smooth river stones. It was warm from her touch, rounded by years of water flow, perfect for small hands to grasp. "This came from a river in my homeland," she told Tommy, placing the stone gently in his palm. "Rivers never stop moving, even when rocks try to block their path. They find a way around, under, through. They never give up." Tommy's fingers closed around the stone with surprising strength. His thumb traced its smooth surface, and something shifted in his expression. Curiosity replaced resignation. "Your papa thinks I'm here to clean his house," Lucia continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think maybe I'm here for something else. Maybe I'm here to help a little river find his way to the sea." She began to hum softly, a melody her grandmother had sung while working in the fields. The sound seemed to unlock something in Tommy. His body relaxed, his breathing deepened, and his legs moved slightly under the blanket. Lucia's trained eyes caught what the medical equipment had missed. Tommy's left leg responded to the movement of his right. When he shifted his weight, both legs engaged at the hip level. The spinal defect might limit nerve transmission, but it hadn't eliminated it entirely. "You feel that, don't you?" she breathed, watching his legs move in subtle synchronization. "They told everyone you couldn't feel your legs, but you do. Maybe not completely, maybe not normally, but you feel them." Tommy made a soft sound, almost like agreement. Lucia glanced toward the kitchen where Helen was still busy with paperwork. Medical protocols demanded documentation, supervision, approval for every deviation from established routines. But sometimes healing required moving beyond protocols. "What if we tried something?" she whispered to Tommy. "Just between us. Nothing dangerous, nothing that could hurt you. Just exploring what your body can really do." She helped Tommy roll from his back to his side, supporting his movement but not controlling it. His core muscles engaged more than anyone had noticed. His balance, while imperfect, was better than the medical assessments suggested. "Good," she encouraged softly. "Now let's see what happens when we help your legs remember they belong to you." Lucia began working with Tommy's legs differently than Caroline had. Instead of passive range of motion exercises, she provided resistance that encouraged his muscles to respond. Tommy's eyes widened as he felt his own strength pushing against her gentle pressure. "You're strong," she told him, amazement coloring her voice. "Stronger than anyone knows." Tommy made another sound, this one clearly purposeful. Not quite a word, but unmistakably communicative. "Yes," Lucia laughed softly. "I hear you. You've been trying to tell them, haven't you?" But they stopped listening because they thought they already knew everything about what you could and couldn't do. The morning session continued for 30 minutes. By the end, Tommy was sitting upright with minimal support, his legs showing coordinated movement patterns that contradicted his medical files. Most remarkably, he was smiling. Not the polite response Helen usually coaxed from him, but genuine joy at discovering his own capabilities. When Helen returned from the kitchen, she found Tommy sitting straighter than usual, his eyes bright with engagement. "He looks different," Helen observed with surprise. "More alert. What did you do?" "We just talked," Lucia said truthfully. Sometimes children need someone to listen to what they're really saying. Helen approached Tommy's chair and immediately noticed the river stone still clutched in his hand. "Where did this come from?" "A gift," Lucia explained. "Something to help him feel connected to the world outside these walls. Dr. Vaughn doesn't approve of unauthorized objects, choking hazards, hygiene concerns." Lucia watched Tommy's grip tighten protectively around the stone. "He won't let go of it. Maybe sometimes we need to trust what children know about what they need." The afternoon brought Dr. Patricia Vaughn for Tommy's weekly evaluation. The doctor was professional and thorough, examining Tommy with the clinical detachment that made him just another case study. Lucia observed from the corner, noting how Tommy's responsiveness diminished under the doctor's impersonal touch. "His muscle tone seems slightly improved," Dr. Vaughn noted, making entries on her tablet. "But we mustn't mistake temporary fluctuations for meaningful progress. Children with his condition often show good days and bad days." "What if the good days could become more frequent?" Lucia asked quietly. Dr. Vaughn looked at her with the patience reserved for well-meaning but uninformed caregivers. "Mrs. Montenegro, I appreciate your optimism, but medical science has clear limitations regarding spina bifida. Our goal is quality of life within realistic parameters, not false hope." "But what if hope isn't false?" Lucia pressed gently. "What if we're the ones with limited vision?" The doctor's expression grew stern. Unqualified individuals who encourage unrealistic expectations do more harm than good. Tommy's family has already endured enough disappointment. After Dr. Vaughn left, Lucia found Tommy in his room, staring at the ceiling with a defeated expression that followed medical evaluations. The river stone lay on his bedside table, confiscated during the examination for safety reasons. "She took your stone," Lucia observed, sitting beside his bed. Tommy's eyes filled with tears that he was too young to hide and too proud to let fall. "But she can't take what you discovered today," Lucia continued softly. "She can't take away what your body knows it can do. That belongs to you forever." As evening approached, Lucia prepared to leave for the day. But something in Tommy's expression stopped her. He was looking at her with desperate intensity, as if trying to communicate something crucial. "What is it, little one?" she asked. Tommy struggled to form words, his mouth working around sounds that wouldn't quite emerge. Finally, with tremendous effort, he whispered one word: "More." Lucia's heart nearly stopped. "More what, sweetheart?" "More walking." The words hung in the air like a prayer and a challenge. Tommy had felt something during their session that morning, something no medical evaluation had detected. His body was telling him walking was possible, even if everyone else insisted it wasn't. "Tomorrow," Lucia promised, her voice thick with emotion. "Tomorrow we'll explore more." As she drove home through Seattle's evening traffic, Lucia's mind raced with possibilities and dangers. Tommy's response to her unconventional approach had exceeded her wildest hopes, but it also placed her in an impossible position. The medical establishment had written him off, his father was emotionally absent, and she was just the housekeeper. But Tommy had said, walking. A child who supposedly couldn't feel his legs was asking for more opportunities to use them. The next morning would bring new challenges and deeper exploration of what Tommy's body could really achieve. Lucia fell asleep that night planning gentle exercises that would build on the foundation they had started, unaware that she was about to discover just how much opposition she would face when hope challenged accepted medical limitations. The tension in the Hartwell mansion was thick enough to cut with a knife when Lucia arrived for her third day. Helen Foster stood in the kitchen, her usually calm demeanor replaced with obvious distress. Dr. Vaughn's black sedan sat in the circular driveway, an ominous presence that made Lucia's stomach clench with worry. "Thank God you're here," Helen whispered as Lucia entered through the side door. Dr. Vaughn arrived an hour early for Tommy's evaluation. "She's not happy about yesterday." Through the living room doorway, Lucia could see the doctor examining Tommy with clinical precision while speaking in low, serious tones to Caroline Reed. Both women wore expressions of professional concern mixed with unmistakable disapproval. "What happened?" Lucia asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Tommy told them he walked yesterday." Helen's voice carried a mixture of wonder and fear. "He kept saying, walking, and pointing at you. Dr. Vaughn thinks someone gave him unrealistic expectations about his capabilities." Lucia's heart hammered against her ribs. Tommy's breakthrough had been real, beautiful, and completely threatening to everyone who had accepted his limitations as permanent. She moved closer to the living room, staying just out of sight while listening to the conversation between the medical professionals. "The child is clearly confused about what constitutes walking," Dr. Vaughn was saying, her voice carrying the authority of years of medical training. "Children with his condition often mistake supported movement for independent mobility. It's why we maintain strict protocols." Caroline nodded in agreement. "I've seen this before. Well-meaning caregivers sometimes encourage movements that feel good to the child but provide false hope to families. It's actually cruel in the long run." "Has the new housekeeper been interacting with Tommy beyond her cleaning duties?" Dr. Vaughn asked. Helen appeared beside Lucia in the kitchen doorway, her face pale with concern. "She was just being kind to him. He responds to her better than anyone since his mother died." "Emotional connection is one thing," Dr. Vaughn replied coldly. "Medical interference is quite another. Tommy's condition requires professional management, not amateur enthusiasm." Lucia felt anger rising in her chest like a tide. Amateur enthusiasm? She had watched Tommy's legs move with purpose, felt the strength in his core muscles, seen the intelligence blazing in his eyes when he realized his body could do more than anyone believed. That wasn't enthusiasm. It was observation. I need to speak with this woman immediately, Dr. Vaughn continued. Unauthorized therapeutic activities could actually harm Tommy's development. False hope is psychologically damaging. Helen turned to Lucia with apologetic eyes. She wants to see you. Taking a deep breath, Lucia smoothed her purple sweater and walked into the living room where Tommy sat in his specialized chair, looking smaller and more defeated than she had seen him since her first day. His dark eyes found hers immediately, pleading silently for her to explain what he had felt, what they had discovered together. Mrs. Montenegro, Dr. Vaughn began without preamble, I understand you've been engaging in activities with Tommy that go beyond your housekeeping responsibilities. I've been caring for him as any adult should care for a child, Lucia replied carefully, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. Caring and medical intervention are two different things. Dr. Vaughn's tone grew sharper. Tommy believes he walked yesterday. This kind of confusion can be deeply harmful to his psychological development. Lucia glanced at Tommy, who was watching the exchange with the intense focus of a child who understood more than adults gave him credit for. His small hands gripped the arms of his chair, and she could see the frustration building in his expression. He did move, Lucia said quietly. More than anyone expected. Caroline stepped forward with barely concealed irritation. Mrs. Montenegro, I've been working with children like Tommy for 15 years. His spinal defect prevents the nerve signals necessary for coordinated leg movement. What you might interpret as walking was likely involuntary muscle spasms or reflexive responses. But what if it wasn't? Lucia challenged, her voice gaining strength. What if everyone has been so focused on what he can't do that nobody noticed what he can do? Dr. Vaughn's expression hardened. Medical assessments are based on scientific evidence, not wishful thinking. Tommy has undergone extensive testing. His condition is well documented and understood. Then why did his legs move together when I provided resistance? Why did his core muscles engage when he shifted position? Why did he ask for more walking? Lucia's words tumbled out with passionate conviction. Because, Dr. Vaughn said with finality, you encouraged movements that felt good to him without understanding the medical implications. Children with spina bifida often retain some sensation and reflexive responses. That doesn't mean walking is possible. Tommy made a sound of distress, a whimper that cut through the adult conversation like a knife. All eyes turned to him as his face reddened with the effort of trying to communicate something crucial. Walk, he said clearly, his young voice ringing with determination. Walk. Lucia. The room fell silent. Even Dr. Vaughn seemed momentarily taken aback by the clarity and purpose in Tommy's voice. He's never been this verbal, Helen whispered in amazement. Emotional excitement can temporarily enhance communication in developmentally delayed children, Dr. Vaughn explained quickly, regaining her professional composure. It doesn't change the underlying medical reality. But Lucia saw something else in Tommy's face, a desperate need to be believed, to have someone acknowledge what he felt in his own body. She knelt beside his chair, meeting his eyes at his level. I believe you, Tommy, she said softly. I know what you felt. This has to stop, Dr. Vaughn declared, her patience clearly exhausted. Mrs. Montenegro, you are not qualified to make medical assessments or encourage therapeutic activities. Your role here is housekeeping, nothing more. My role, Lucia said, rising to face the doctor, is to care for this child while his father is away. And caring means seeing him as a whole person, not just a collection of medical limitations. Caroline moved protectively closer to Tommy's chair. You're putting him at risk. Inappropriate movements could damage his spine further. Do you want to be responsible for making his condition worse? The accusation hit Lucia like a physical blow. The possibility of harming Tommy was her greatest fear, but was avoiding all risk worth sacrificing all possibility? What if doing nothing is what's really harming him? She countered. What if accepting limitations without exploring potential is the real tragedy? Dr. Vaughn pulled out her phone. I'm calling Mr. Hartwell. This situation requires immediate intervention. Lucia's blood turned cold. Ben was in Denver, focused on his business deals, trying to escape the reality of his son's condition. A call from Tommy's doctor about the housekeeper overstepping boundaries would result in her immediate termination. "Dr. Vaughn, please," Helen interjected. "Mr. Hartwell is in crucial negotiations. Maybe we could handle this internally." "This is beyond internal handling," the doctor replied, already dialing. "Unqualified personnel cannot be permitted to interfere with established medical protocols." Tommy began making distressed sounds, sensing the tension surrounding him. His hands reached toward Lucia, but Caroline gently redirected his arms back to his chair. "It's all right, Tommy," Caroline said in her professional soothing voice. "Everything will go back to normal soon." But normal meant resignation. Normal meant accepting defeat without a fight. Normal meant a brilliant little boy spending his life in chairs and braces because everyone had stopped believing in miracles. Lucia watched Dr. Vaughn speak to Ben's voicemail, leaving a message about concerning developments that required his immediate attention. Each word felt like a nail in the coffin of Tommy's newfound hope. "Mr. Hartwell will return my call within the hour," Dr. Vaughn announced, ending the message. "Until then, Mrs. Montenegro, you are not to engage in any activities with Tommy beyond basic care."
"Is that understood?"
"Understood," Lucia replied, though understanding and agreeing were two different things entirely. Helen began preparing Tommy's lunch while Caroline packed up her equipment, both women moving with the careful neutrality of professionals trying to avoid further conflict. The room felt heavy with unspoken tensions and crushed possibilities. Tommy sat quietly in his chair, but his eyes never left Lucia's face. In his gaze, she saw confusion, betrayal, and the dawning realization that the adult world was full of people who said they knew what was best for him without ever asking what he wanted for himself. "I have to go update his files," Dr. Vaughn announced. "Caroline, please ensure Mrs. Montenegro understands the severity of this situation." After the doctor left, Caroline approached Lucia with a mixture of sympathy and exasperation. "Look, I know you care about Tommy. That's obvious. But caring isn't enough when medical issues are involved. What if medical issues aren't the whole story?" Lucia asked desperately. "What if there's more to healing than just managing symptoms?" Caroline's expression softened slightly. "I've worked with hundreds of children like Tommy. I've seen families destroy themselves chasing impossible dreams. The kindest thing we can do is help them accept reality and focus on achievable goals." "But what if reality is bigger than we think it is?" "Then we'd see evidence in clinical trials, peer-reviewed studies, documented cases," Caroline replied. "We don't make medical decisions based on feelings, Mrs. Montenegro. We base them on facts." Lucia looked at Tommy, who was listening to every word with the solemn attention of a child learning that the adult world was far more complicated and disappointing than he had imagined. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the most important facts are the ones that don't fit in medical charts." Caroline shook her head and began wheeling her equipment toward the door. "I hope for everyone's sake that Mr. Hartwell resolves this situation quickly. False hope helps no one." After Caroline left, the house felt different. The air itself seemed heavier, charged with conflict and unresolved tension. Helen busied herself with household tasks, avoiding eye contact with Lucia, while Tommy sat in his chair with the defeated posture of a child who had dared to dream and been told his dreams were dangerous. Lucia's phone buzzed with a text message. Her heart sank when she saw Ben's name on the screen. Received message from Dr. Vaughn. "We need to talk immediately. Call me." She stared at the message, knowing that this conversation would likely end her employment and Tommy's chance to explore his true potential. Ben would side with medical authority over the observations of a housekeeper. He would choose the safety of accepted limitations over the risk of reaching for something more. But as she looked at Tommy, slumped in his chair like a flower wilting in shadow, Lucia realized that some battles were worth fighting even when you knew you would lose. Tomorrow would bring consequences and difficult choices, but tonight she would find a way to remind Tommy that what he had felt was real, regardless of what anyone else believed. The sound of her phone ringing filled the quiet house, Ben's name flashing on the screen. Lucia took a deep breath and prepared to defend the indefensible, the belief that miracles could happen when love refused to accept limitations. The phone call with Ben had been as devastating as Lucia expected. His voice carried the cold authority of a man accustomed to making difficult decisions based on expert advice rather than emotional appeals. "Dr. Vaughn has been Tommy's physician since birth," he had said, his words cutting through her explanations like surgical instruments. "If she says you overstepped boundaries, then you overstepped boundaries. I hired you to maintain my house, not to play therapist with my son. Mr. Hartwell, if you could just see what I saw." "What you saw was a disabled child having muscle spasms that you misinterpreted as progress." Dr. Vaughn explained the medical reality. "Tommy's condition doesn't improve, it's managed." The conversation had ended with Ben's instruction to stick to housekeeping duties until his return on Friday, when they would discuss your future employment. Lucia knew that discussion would be brief and final. Now, as Thursday evening settled over Seattle, an unexpected crisis changed everything. Helen Foster received the emergency call at 7:15, just as she was preparing to leave for the day. Her face went pale as she listened to the voice on the other end. "My mother's had a stroke," she announced, her hands shaking as she gathered her purse and coat. "I have to drive to Portland immediately. She's in surgery now." Lucia looked up from where she was organizing Tommy's evening medications. "How long will you be gone?" "I don't know. Could be days. Could be." Helen's voice trailed off, unable to voice the possibility that her mother might not survive. "What about Tommy's overnight care?" Lucia asked, though she already knew the answer would complicate everything. "Dr. Vaughn arranged for a night nurse to start Monday when Mr. Hartwell returns, but there's no coverage until then." Helen's professional composure cracked. "I can't leave Tommy alone overnight, but I can't leave my mother either." Caroline Reed had already left for the day, unreachable at her daughter's soccer tournament in Spokane. Dr. Vaughn was attending a medical conference in Vancouver and wouldn't return until Saturday. The careful network of professional care that surrounded Tommy had suddenly collapsed, leaving only Lucia. "I'll stay," Lucia said without hesitation. Helen paused in her frantic preparations. "You can't. Mr. Hartwell specifically said." "Mr. Hartwell said I shouldn't do therapy with Tommy. He didn't say I couldn't provide basic overnight care in an emergency." Lucia's voice carried quiet determination. "What's the alternative? Leave a 3-year-old alone. But if something happens..." "Nothing will happen that I can't handle. I've cared for children before." Lucia didn't mention that one of those children had been her own son, Roberto, whose memory still guided her hands when she touched fevered foreheads or soothed nighttime fears. Helen hesitated, torn between medical protocols and maternal emergency. Dr. Vaughn left explicit instructions about Tommy's care, which I'll follow exactly. Lucia pulled out her phone. "Give me her number. I'll call every few hours with updates if necessary." "She won't approve of this arrangement." "She doesn't have to approve. She just has to accept that sometimes life doesn't follow medical schedules." 20 minutes later, Helen's car disappeared into the rainy Seattle evening, leaving Lucia alone with Tommy for the first time since their morning discovery had been declared dangerous and inappropriate. Tommy sat in his evening chair, having eaten only half his dinner despite Lucia's gentle encouragement. The day's conflicts had exhausted him, and his small body carried the weight of being discussed, evaluated, and dismissed by adults who spoke about him as if he weren't present. "Just you and me tonight, little one," Lucia said softly, kneeling beside his chair. "How does that sound?" Tommy's dark eyes met hers with cautious hope. The events of the day had taught him that grown-ups could change their minds about what was allowed and what was forbidden, but something in Lucia's voice promised steadiness. "Lucia, stay," he asked, his vocabulary limited but his meaning crystal clear. "I stay," she confirmed, her heart breaking at how such a simple promise could mean so much to a child who had been abandoned by too many people who were supposed to care for him. The evening routine proceeded according to Helen's detailed instructions. Medications administered on schedule, medical equipment checked and positioned correctly, emergency contact numbers posted prominently by every phone. Lucia followed every protocol with meticulous care, knowing that any deviation would be used as evidence against her judgment. But as the hours passed and Tommy's bedtime approached, she noticed changes that wouldn't appear in any medical chart. His breathing was deeper and more relaxed than she had seen before. His hands moved more freely, no longer constrained by the careful positioning that medical staff insisted upon. Most remarkably, his legs showed subtle signs of increased circulation, warmer to the touch, better color, slight movements that seemed purposeful rather than reflexive. "Your body knows you're safe," she observed, helping him into his specially designed pajamas. "When we're not afraid, our muscles can remember things they forgot." Tommy nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to his 3-year-old understanding of the world. The bedtime routine included reading from a carefully selected collection of books that Dr. Vaughn had approved for appropriate developmental stimulation. But when Lucia reached for The Very Hungry Caterpillar, Tommy shook his head and pointed toward a different bookshelf. There, hidden behind medical journals and therapy manuals, sat a collection of picture books that clearly belonged to happier times. Books with worn covers and dog-eared pages, books that had been read with love before grief and guilt made such simple pleasures feel impossible. Tommy pointed specifically at a book about a little engine climbing a mountain, and Lucia understood immediately. Stories about overcoming impossible odds, about believing in yourself when everyone else said you couldn't succeed. I think I can, she read in her gentle voice, and Tommy mouthed the words along with her, remembering perhaps when his mother had read these same words in this same room. As the story progressed, something remarkable happened. Tommy began moving his legs in rhythm with the little engine's journey up the mountain. Not the involuntary spasms that medical professionals dismissed, but purposeful movements that matched the story's emotional beats. "You feel the engine climbing, don't you?" Lucia whispered. "Your legs want to climb too." Instead of discouraging this response, she supported it. When the little engine struggled, she provided gentle resistance against Tommy's leg movements, allowing him to feel his own strength pushing against real obstacles. When the engine celebrated reaching the summit, she helped him lift his legs in triumph. I think I can, Tommy whispered along with the story, but his eyes weren't on the book. They were focused on his own legs, moving with more coordination and purpose than anyone had seen since his birth. "You know you can," Lucia whispered back. "Your body knows, even if your doctors don't believe it yet." After the story ended, Tommy's usual bedtime resistance was nowhere to be found. He settled into his specially designed bed with contentment rather than resignation, his small hand reaching for Lucia's fingers. "Don't go," he said simply. "I'll be right in the living room," she promised. "If you need anything, you call my name." "Promise. Promise." But 20 minutes later, Tommy called out not in distress but in excitement. "Lucia! Look!" She rushed to his room, expecting to find him tangled in his blankets or having a bad dream. Instead, she found him sitting upright in bed without assistance, his legs positioned underneath him in a way that should have been impossible given his medical assessments. "Tommy," she breathed, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. "How did you?" "Legs work," he said with matter-of-fact 3-year-old logic. "When quiet. When not scared." Lucia approached slowly, not wanting to break the spell of whatever was happening. Tommy's core muscles were engaged, his spine straight, his legs bearing partial weight even in the sitting position. Everything Dr. Vaughn said was medically impossible was happening right in front of her eyes. "Can you feel your legs?" she asked softly. Tommy nodded. "Feel good. Feel strong. What else can you feel?" In response, Tommy slowly lifted one leg and then the other, movements that were deliberate and controlled. His face showed concentration but not strain, effort but not distress. "Want to try standing?" he asked, the question so unexpected that Lucia almost gasped. Every medical protocol screamed against it. Dr. Vaughn's warnings about spinal damage echoed in her mind. But Tommy's eyes blazed with determination and hope, and his body was demonstrating capabilities that contradicted every expert assessment. "Very carefully," she whispered, moving to support him. "Very, very carefully." What happened next would be burned into Lucia's memory forever. With her hands providing minimal support, Tommy shifted his weight and slowly, deliberately, stood up beside his bed. Not the supported standing that physical therapy attempted, but actual weight-bearing, muscle-controlled standing. He wobbled slightly, his legs shaking with the effort of supporting his body weight, but he remained upright for nearly 10 seconds before carefully lowering himself back to sitting position. "I stood," he announced with quiet triumph. "I stood up." Lucia felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at this remarkable little boy who had just defied every medical prediction about his future. "Yes, you did. You absolutely did. Tomorrow, walk?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. Walking was exponentially more complex than standing, requiring balance, coordination, and strength that Tommy was only beginning to discover he possessed. "Tomorrow we'll see what else your body can teach us," she promised carefully. "But tonight, you've already done something amazing." As Tommy settled back into his pillows, exhausted but exhilarated by his achievement, Lucia realized that their forced proximity had revealed something extraordinary. Away from medical supervision, clinical expectations, and the weight of professional skepticism, Tommy's body was remembering abilities that everyone had written off as impossible. The night stretched ahead of them, full of questions that would have to be answered come morning. Dr. Vaughn would return to her protocols, Caroline would dismiss tonight's events as anomalies, and Ben would side with medical authority over miraculous possibility. But Tommy had stood up. Whatever happened next, whatever consequences awaited her employment and his treatment, Tommy had proven that his body contained potentials that no medical chart had measured. Lucia settled into the comfortable chair beside his bed, watching his peaceful sleep and planning how to protect this fragile new hope from the skepticism that would greet the morning. Outside, Seattle slept under a canopy of stars, unaware that in one quiet room, a little boy was rewriting the story of what was possible when love refused to accept limitations. Sometimes our greatest breakthroughs happen when we're left alone with our true potential. The soft sound of Tommy calling her name pulled Lucia from restless sleep in the living room chair. Dawn was breaking over Puget Sound, painting the mansion's large windows with gold and pink light. She had dozed fitfully, waking every hour to check on Tommy, her mind spinning with the implications of what she had witnessed the night before. "Lucia," Tommy called again, his voice carrying excitement rather than distress. She hurried to his room and found him sitting up in bed, fully alert and eager. But what stopped her breath wasn't his wakefulness. It was the careful way he had positioned his legs, crossed beneath him in a posture that required core strength and hip flexibility that his medical files insisted he didn't possess. "Good morning, little warrior," she said softly, approaching his bed with wonder. "How do you feel?" "Strong," Tommy replied without hesitation. "Legs feel awake." Lucia knelt beside his bed, studying his face for any signs of discomfort or strain. Instead, she saw clarity and determination that seemed to grow stronger each time he defied medical expectations. "Can you show me how awake they feel?" she asked gently. Tommy's response was to slowly uncross his legs and swing them over the side of the bed. The movement was deliberate and controlled, requiring coordination between his core muscles, hips, and legs that should have been neurologically impossible. "Tommy, that's incredible," Lucia breathed, watching his feet actually make contact with the floor. "How long have you been able to move like this?" "Always," he said with 3-year-old simplicity. "But nobody asked." The words hit Lucia like a physical blow. Always. This brilliant child had been demonstrating capabilities that everyone had overlooked, dismissed, or explained away because they contradicted established medical understanding. "Why didn't you show the doctors?" she asked gently. Tommy's expression grew serious, and for a moment he looked far older than his 3 years. "They said can't. So I stopped trying." The tragedy of learned helplessness crystallized in that simple statement. Tommy had internalized the limitations everyone placed on him, hiding his true abilities to avoid disappointing adults who had already decided what was possible for his future. As Lucia helped Tommy with his morning routine, she noticed other changes that would never appear in medical charts. His appetite was better, his sleep had been deeper, and his overall muscle tone seemed improved after just one night away from clinical supervision. But the morning's peace was shattered by the sound of Helen Foster's car pulling into the driveway at 8:30. Through the window, Lucia could see the exhaustion etched on Helen's face as she gathered her things and walked slowly toward the house. "Helen's back," Lucia told Tommy, who immediately tensed with the knowledge that their protected time together was ending. Helen entered through the kitchen door, her eyes red with tears and fatigue. "My mother made it through surgery," she announced without preamble. She's stable but critical. I can only stay a few hours before driving back to Portland."
"How is she really?"
Lucia asked, reading the deeper worry in Helen's expression. "The doctors say the next 48 hours will determine." Helen's voice broke slightly. "She's 83. Strokes at her age." Tommy appeared in his wheelchair, which Lucia had positioned him in according to standard morning protocol. But she noticed how he sat straighter than usual, how his legs were positioned more naturally, how his entire posture suggested strength rather than resignation. "Tommy looks good," Helen observed with surprise. "Better than I've seen him in weeks."
"How was the night?"
"Peaceful," Lucia replied carefully. "He slept well, ate his breakfast, took his medications on schedule." What she didn't mention was Tommy's evening standing session, his improved mobility, or his revelation that he had always possessed capabilities everyone assumed were impossible. Those truths felt too fragile to expose to medical skepticism just yet. Helen busied herself checking Tommy's medical charts and medication schedule, but Lucia noticed her movements were distracted, her mind clearly focused on her mother's hospital room 3 hours away. "You should go back to Portland," Lucia said gently. "I can continue caring for Tommy until Mr. Hartwell returns this afternoon." "Dr. Vaughn expects me to resume normal protocols," Helen replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "After yesterday's concerns, she wants strict supervision. Tommy's father will be home in 6 hours. Nothing will happen that I can't handle." Helen looked at Tommy, who was watching the conversation with the intense focus of a child who understood that his future was being decided by adults who weren't asking his opinion. "He does seem more settled with you," Helen admitted reluctantly. "But if Dr. Vaughn calls—" "I'll handle Dr. Vaughn," Lucia said with more confidence than she felt. 20 minutes later, Helen's car disappeared again down the long driveway, leaving Lucia and Tommy alone for what would likely be their final hours together before Ben returned to end her employment. "Just us again," Lucia said, settling beside Tommy's chair. "Show you something," Tommy announced, his eyes bright with secret knowledge. Before Lucia could respond, Tommy began maneuvering himself out of his wheelchair with movements that were far more coordinated than anyone had observed before. He lowered himself to the floor with careful control, then began what could only be described as crawling, but crawling that engaged his legs in ways that contradicted every medical assessment. "Tommy," Lucia gasped, "how long have you been able to do that?" "Long time," he replied, continuing his demonstration. "But scared to show. Scared they take away." "Take away what?" "The trying. The feeling strong." Lucia understood with painful clarity. Tommy had learned to hide his abilities because adults responded to his efforts with fear rather than encouragement, with limitations rather than possibilities. As she watched him move across the living room floor with determination and surprising grace, memories of her own son flooded her consciousness with unexpected force. "You remind me of someone very special," she said softly, settling on the floor beside him. "Who?" Tommy asked, pausing in his movement to look at her with curious eyes. For the first time since Roberto's death, Lucia felt ready to speak his name aloud. "My son. His name was Roberto, and he was brave like you." Tommy studied her face with the intuitive wisdom that children possessed. "Where is Roberto?" "He's in heaven now," Lucia replied, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "But before he went to heaven, he taught me something very important about what children can do when grown-ups believe in them." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small photograph, one she had carried for 2 years but never shown to anyone. The picture showed a laughing 6-year-old boy with dark hair and sparkling eyes, standing proudly beside a bicycle that had seemed impossibly large for his small frame. "Roberto was born with a heart problem," she explained, her voice growing stronger as she shared the story she had kept locked inside. "The doctors said he would never run, never play sports, never ride a bicycle. They said his heart couldn't handle the strain." Tommy studied the photograph with intense concentration. "But he has bicycle." "Yes, he does. Because Roberto decided that what his heart could handle was bigger than what the doctors measured in their tests." Lucia's memory carried her back to a sunny afternoon in Los Angeles, when Roberto had insisted on learning to ride the bicycle she had bought against medical advice. "It took him 3 months to learn," she continued. 3 months of falling down and getting back up, of being tired and scared but trying again anyway. The doctors were angry with me for letting him try.
Did he ride?
He rode like the wind, Lucia said, smiling through her tears. For 2 beautiful years, he rode that bicycle everywhere. To school, to the park, to visit his grandmother. He showed everyone that hearts can be stronger than medical charts say they are. Tommy touched the photograph gently with one finger. What happened? An accident, Lucia said simply. A car that didn't see him crossing the street. But Roberto died doing what the doctors said was impossible, living like a normal little boy who happened to have a special heart. The room fell quiet as Tommy processed the story, his young mind working to understand concepts of loss and courage that were almost too large for his experience. Did doctors say sorry? He asked finally.
No,
Lucia replied honestly. They said I should have kept him safe at home, protected from risks. They said it was my fault for believing in possibilities instead of limitations.
But Roberto was happy?
Roberto was so happy. In the 2 years he rode that bicycle, he lived more fully than if he had spent 20 years being careful and afraid. Tommy nodded solemnly, then looked down at his own legs with new understanding. Maybe my legs like Roberto's heart?
Maybe they are,
Lucia agreed. Maybe they're stronger than anyone knows, just waiting for someone to believe in what they can do. What happened next took Lucia's breath away. Tommy positioned himself carefully on the floor, then slowly, deliberately, began to pull himself upright using the coffee table for support. His legs shook with effort but held his weight as he achieved a standing position. Like Roberto, he whispered with fierce determination. Exactly like Roberto, Lucia confirmed, her heart breaking and soaring simultaneously. Tommy took one careful step away from the coffee table, then another. His balance was imperfect, his movements unsteady, but he was undeniably walking. 3 steps before he sat down carefully on the couch, exhausted but triumphant. I walked, he announced, his voice filled with wonder. You walked, Lucia agreed, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the miracle that everyone had declared impossible. But their moment of triumph was interrupted by the sound of a car in the driveway. Through the window, Lucia could see Ben's black BMW pulling up to the house, 2 hours earlier than expected. Papa's home, Tommy said, his expression immediately clouding with worry. Lucia's heart clenched as she realized their time of discovery and possibility was ending. Ben would walk through that door expecting to find his son properly positioned in medical equipment, supervised according to established protocols, limited to the movements that professionals had deemed safe and appropriate. Instead, he would find Tommy on the couch where he had walked under his own power, and Lucia who had encouraged the very activities that medical experts had forbidden. What do we tell Papa? Tommy asked, his small voice carrying all the complexity of a child caught between truth and expectation. Lucia looked at this remarkable little boy who had just proven that miracles were possible when love refused to accept limitations, and made a decision that would change all their lives forever. We tell him the truth, she said quietly. We show him what you can really do, and we let him decide if he's brave enough to believe in possibilities instead of problems. The sound of Ben's key in the front door echoed through the house like the beginning of the most important conversation any of them would ever have. The front door opened with the familiar sound of Ben's arrival home from business trips, the careful placement of his leather briefcase, the soft thud of expensive shoes being removed, the rustle of suit jacket being hung in the entry closet. But today, these routine sounds felt charged with impending confrontation. Lucia positioned herself protectively near Tommy, who remained sitting on the couch where he had walked moments before. His small face showed a mixture of excitement and fear, excitement about showing his father what he could do, fear about what would happen when he did. Tommy! Ben's voice called from the entryway, carrying its usual tone of cautious affection mixed with the emotional distance he had maintained since Rebecca's death. Daddy's home. In here, Papa, Tommy replied, his voice stronger and clearer than Ben had heard in months. Ben appeared in the living room doorway, still wearing his charcoal business suit. His green eyes immediately scanning the room for signs of the concerning developments Dr. Vaughn had described in her voicemail. What he saw instead was his son sitting naturally on the couch, not strapped into medical equipment, not positioned according to therapeutic protocols, but simply sitting like any other child might sit. "Mrs. Montenegro," Ben acknowledged with cool professionalism, his gaze taking in Tommy's improved posture and the absence of his usual medical supports. "We need to discuss Dr. Vaughn's concerns about yesterday's activities." "Yes, we do," Lucia agreed, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But first, Tommy has something to show you." Ben's expression hardened. "Mrs. Montenegro, I thought I made it clear that unauthorized therapeutic activities—" "Papa," Tommy interrupted, his young voice cutting through the adult tension with surprising authority. "Look at me. Really look." Something in his son's tone made Ben pause. He looked, really looked, at Tommy for perhaps the first time since returning from his last business trip. What he saw defied every expectation he had carried about his son's capabilities. Tommy sat with perfect posture, his legs positioned naturally beneath him. His eyes blazed with intelligence and determination that Ben had never noticed before. Most remarkably, his entire demeanor radiated confidence rather than the resigned acceptance that had characterized his presence since birth. "You look different," Ben said slowly, approaching the couch with cautious steps. "Feel different too," Tommy replied, his vocabulary clearer and more extensive than Ben remembered. "Feel strong." "Tommy's been working very hard," Lucia said carefully, choosing her words with deliberate precision. "He's discovered some abilities that might surprise you." Ben's business instincts kicked in, the same analytical approach that had built his technology empire. "What kind of abilities?" Dr. Vaughn was very specific about his limitations. "What if Dr. Vaughn was wrong?" Tommy asked with 3-year-old directness that cut straight to the heart of the matter. The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything Ben had accepted about his son's future. For 3 years, he had built his understanding of Tommy's condition on medical authority, scientific assessments, and expert opinions that all pointed toward the same conclusion: management, not improvement. "Doctors aren't wrong about medical conditions, Tommy," Ben said gently, but his voice carried less conviction than usual. "This doctor was," Tommy replied with matter-of-fact certainty. "Watch." Before Ben could object, Tommy began sliding forward on the couch with movements that were deliberate and controlled. His legs moved in coordination with his arms, his core muscles engaged to maintain balance, his entire body working together in ways that contradicted every medical assessment Ben had received. "Tommy, be careful," Ben said instinctively, moving closer to catch his son if he fell. But Tommy didn't fall. With Lucia providing minimal support, just her hands positioned for safety rather than assistance, Tommy lowered himself to the floor and then, with breathtaking determination, began to stand up. Ben froze, watching his son achieve what multiple specialists had declared medically impossible. Tommy's legs shook with effort, his face showed intense concentration, but he was undeniably supporting his own weight in a standing position. "I'm standing, Papa," Tommy said, his voice filled with pride and joy. "All by myself." Ben's carefully constructed worldview shattered in that moment. Everything he thought he knew about his son's limitations, about medical certainty, about the fixed nature of spina bifida, crumbled as he watched Tommy stand on legs that supposedly couldn't bear weight. "How?" Ben whispered, unable to finish the question. "He's always had more ability than anyone realized," Lucia explained softly. "He just needed someone to believe it was possible." Tommy took one careful step toward his father, then another. His balance was imperfect, his gait unsteady, but he was walking. Actually walking across the living room toward Ben with determination blazing in his dark eyes. "3 steps," Tommy announced as he carefully sat down on the carpet, exhausted but triumphant. "Tomorrow, maybe 4. Ben dropped to his knees beside his son, his hands shaking as he reached out to touch Tommy's legs. "You can feel this?" he asked, gently pressing Tommy's calf muscle. "Feel everything," Tommy confirmed. "Leg's been talking to me long time." Nobody listened except Lucia. Ben looked up at Lucia with an expression that mixed wonder, gratitude, and something that might have been the beginning of hope. "How is this possible?" "The doctors, the tests, the medical imaging." "Sometimes medical tests measure what's wrong instead of what's right," Lucia replied carefully. "Tommy's spinal defect is real, but it doesn't affect his legs the way everyone assumed. The nerve pathways are different, not absent. But Dr. Vaughn said. Dr. Vaughn looked at scans and saw limitations, Lucia interrupted gently. I looked at Tommy and saw possibilities. Ben studied his son with new eyes, seeing for the first time the strength and determination that had been hidden beneath medical equipment and therapeutic protocols. How long have you been able to do this? Always, Tommy replied with simple honesty. But scared to show. Scared you be sad if I try and fall down. The words pierced Ben's heart like arrows. His son had been hiding his abilities out of fear of disappointing a father who was already drowning in disappointment about his condition. Tommy, Ben said, his voice thick with emotion, I could never be sad about you trying. I'm only sad that you felt you had to hide this from me. You were scared too, Tommy observed with the startling insight that children sometimes possessed. Scared of doctors saying no. Ben realized with painful clarity that his son was right. He had been so afraid of false hope, so terrified of disappointment, that he had stopped looking for possibilities. He had accepted medical limitations as immutable facts rather than starting points for exploration. I was scared, Ben admitted, perhaps the first completely honest thing he had said to his son since Rebecca's death. I was scared of hoping for something that might not happen. But it did happen, Tommy pointed out with irrefutable 3-year-old logic. I'm walking. You are walking, Ben agreed, wonder creeping into his voice. You're absolutely walking. Lucia watched the transformation happening between father and son with tears streaming down her face. This was what she had hoped for, not just Tommy's physical breakthrough, but the emotional breakthrough that would reconnect him with his father. Can you show me more? Ben asked, his business executive persona replaced by something vulnerable and genuinely curious. Tommy's response was immediate. With Lucia's supportive presence nearby, he demonstrated the range of movements he had been practicing in secret. Rolling from sitting to lying down. Pulling himself upright using furniture. Taking several steps between stable supports. Each movement revealed capabilities that contradicted medical assessments. But more importantly, each movement revealed a little boy who had been trapped not just by physical limitations, but by the expectations of adults who had stopped believing in growth. This is incredible, Ben breathed, watching Tommy navigate the living room with increasing confidence. Why didn't anyone see this before? Because nobody was looking for it, Lucia replied. Everyone was focused on managing his condition, not exploring his potential. Ben's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Dr. Vaughn's name appeared on the screen, and he realized that the conversation he had been dreading was about to become much more complicated. That's Dr. Vaughn, he said, showing Lucia the caller ID. Answer it, Lucia encouraged. Tell her what you've seen. Ben accepted the call with trembling fingers. Dr. Vaughn. Mr. Hartwell, I trust you've addressed the situation with Mrs. Montenegro? The doctor's voice carried professional authority tinged with impatience. We cannot have unqualified personnel encouraging unrealistic expectations about Tommy's capabilities. Ben looked at his son, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor, a position that should have been impossible given his supposed hip flexibility limitations. Dr. Vaughn, Ben said slowly, I need to ask you something. Is it possible that our understanding of Tommy's condition has been incomplete? I'm not sure what you mean. Tommy's condition is well documented and thoroughly understood. What if it's not? Ben pressed, his voice gaining strength. What if there are capabilities we haven't discovered because we weren't looking for them? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Hartwell, I understand that hope is natural, but false hope is cruel. Mrs. Montenegro has clearly filled your head with impossible dreams. She's filled my eyes with impossible realities, Ben replied, watching Tommy demonstrate another movement that defied medical prediction. Dr. Vaughn, Tommy is walking. That's medically impossible. Then you need to expand your definition of medical possibility. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Dr. Vaughn insisting on immediate evaluation and Ben insisting on protecting Tommy's newfound confidence. When the call ended, Ben realized he had just chosen his son's potential over medical authority, a choice he would have been incapable of making a week ago. What happens now? Lucia asked quietly. Ben looked at Tommy, who was watching his father with hope and trust that hadn't been present since Rebecca's death. Then he looked at Lucia, who had given his son the gift of believing in himself. Now we figure out how to nurture this miracle without letting anyone convince Tommy it's impossible, Ben said with quiet determination. And we make sure you're part of that process. Mr. Hartwell.
Ben, he corrected.
And I think it's time we stopped pretending you're just the housekeeper. You're Tommy's miracle worker, and miracles deserve respect. As the afternoon sun streamed through the living room windows, illuminating a father, son, and the woman who had brought them back together, the Hartwell house felt like a home for the first time since Rebecca's death. Sometimes the greatest healing happens when we stop trying to fix what's broken and start celebrating what's possible. The peaceful afternoon of discovery and bonding was shattered at 6:15 when Dr. Vaughn's black sedan pulled into the Hartwell driveway, followed immediately by Caroline Reed's silver SUV. Through the living room windows, Ben watched the two women emerge from their vehicles with the grim determination of medical professionals preparing for an intervention. "They're here," he announced quietly, his newfound confidence wavering as reality crashed back into their bubble of possibility. Tommy looked up from where he had been practicing standing transitions on the carpet, his small face immediately clouding with worry.
"Are they angry?"
"They're concerned," Lucia said carefully, though she could see the storm approaching in the rigid postures of the two women marching toward the front door.
"They don't understand what we've discovered."
Ben straightened his tie and moved toward the entryway, his business executive mask sliding back into place. But Lucia noticed the subtle tremor in his hands, the way his jaw tightened with the knowledge that he was about to defend something that contradicted everything his son's medical team believed possible. The doorbell rang with sharp authority, and Ben opened it to find Dr. Vaughn and Caroline standing like a unified front of medical disapproval. "Mr. Hartwell," Dr. Vaughn began without preamble, "we need to conduct an immediate evaluation of Tommy's condition. Your phone call this afternoon raised serious concerns about unauthorized activities and unrealistic assessments of his capabilities." "Please come in," Ben replied with forced politeness, stepping aside to allow them entry. The two women entered the living room and immediately assessed the scene with clinical eyes. Tommy sat on the carpet in a natural cross-legged position, while Lucia knelt nearby with her hands ready to provide support if needed. To medical professionals accustomed to seeing Tommy strapped into specialized equipment, the informal setup appeared dangerously uncontrolled. "Where is Tommy's positioning chair?" Caroline asked, her voice sharp with concern. "Why isn't he properly supported?" "He doesn't need it right now," Ben replied, his voice carrying more confidence than he felt. "He's been demonstrating remarkable stability and mobility." Dr. Vaughn's expression hardened. "Mr. Hartwell, I need you to understand something. Children with spina bifida often show periods of increased activity that can be mistaken for improvement. What you're interpreting as progress could actually be muscle spasms or reflexive responses that indicate neurological stress." "What if it's not?" Tommy asked suddenly, his clear voice cutting through the adult conversation. "What if I really can walk?" Both medical professionals turned to stare at Tommy with surprise. His verbal clarity and confident eye contact were notably different from his usual subdued responses during medical visits. "Tommy," Dr. Vaughn said in the carefully modulated tone reserved for talking to disabled children, "we've explained before that your spine doesn't allow the signals needed for walking. What you might feel as walking is really your body trying to move in ways it can't actually accomplish." "But I did walk," Tommy replied with matter-of-fact certainty. "I walked to Papa. I walked to the kitchen. I walked lots." Caroline moved closer with her professional assessment tools. "Tommy, I need to check your muscle responses and positioning. Can you lie down on the couch so I can evaluate your current status?" "Don't want to lie down," Tommy said quietly but firmly. "Want to show you walking." The simple refusal sent a ripple of tension through the room. Medical evaluations typically proceeded with patient compliance, not negotiations with 3-year-olds about cooperation. "Tommy needs to follow medical protocols," Dr. Vaughn stated with authority. "Mrs. Montenegro, please assist in positioning him for proper examination." Lucia looked at Tommy, who was watching her with pleading eyes, then at Ben, who was clearly torn between supporting his son and deferring to medical expertise. "What if we let Tommy show you what he can do first?" Lucia suggested carefully. Then you can conduct whatever evaluations you feel are necessary. Absolutely not, Caroline replied sharply. Encouraging inappropriate movements could cause serious injury. Tommy's spine is fragile, and uncontrolled activity could result in permanent damage. More damage than telling him he can't do things he's already doing? Lucia challenged, her protective instincts overriding her caution. Dr. Vaughn's patience snapped. Mrs. Montenegro, you are not qualified to make medical judgments. Your interference has already created a dangerous situation where Tommy believes he has capabilities that could result in serious injury if he attempts to use them. Maybe you should see what those capabilities actually are before deciding they're dangerous, Ben interjected, surprising everyone including himself with his support for Lucia's position. Mr. Hartwell, Dr. Vaughn said with the stern authority she reserved for non-compliant parents, I understand that hope is natural, but false hope is psychologically damaging to children. Tommy needs to understand and accept his limitations so he can focus on achievable goals within his actual capabilities. Show them, Papa, Tommy said quietly, looking up at his father with complete trust. Show them I can walk. The moment crystallized around that simple request. Ben realized he faced a choice that would define not just Tommy's future, but their relationship for years to come. He could side with medical authority and return to the safe world of managed expectations, or he could trust what he had witnessed and defend his son's remarkable progress. Tommy, Ben said gently, would you like to show Dr. Vaughn and Caroline how you can move? Mr. Hartwell, Dr. Vaughn warned, I cannot recommend allowing unauthorized physical activities that could. Stand up, Tommy, Ben said clearly, his decision made. What happened next would be burned into everyone's memory forever. Tommy positioned his hands carefully on the carpet, engaged his core muscles, and slowly pulled himself upright. His legs shook slightly with effort, but they held his weight as he achieved a standing position without assistance. Dr. Vaughn and Caroline stared in stunned silence as Tommy took one careful step, then another, then a third, walking across the living room with determination blazing in his eyes. Impossible, Dr. Vaughn whispered, her clinical composure cracking for the first time. 3 steps, Tommy announced proudly, lowering himself carefully to the couch. Yesterday was 2 steps. Tomorrow may be 4. Caroline rushed forward with her assessment tools, her hands shaking as she examined Tommy's legs. There's muscle tone here that wasn't present in previous evaluations. Coordinated movement patterns. Response to stimuli. How? How is this possible? Dr. Vaughn demanded, her voice rising with a mixture of wonder and professional defensiveness. Our imaging studies clearly showed. Your imaging studies showed anatomical structures, Lucia replied calmly. They didn't measure hope, determination, or the power of believing in yourself. Medical science doesn't operate on hope and determination, Dr. Vaughn snapped back. It operates on measurable, reproducible evidence. Then measure this, Ben said, gesturing toward his son who was sitting on the couch with quiet pride. Reproduce these results if you can. But don't tell me it's not happening when I can see it with my own eyes. Dr. Vaughn pulled out her phone. I'm calling for immediate transport to the hospital. Tommy needs comprehensive neurological testing, spinal imaging, and... Her voice trailed off as she realized the implications of what she was witnessing. You're calling for tests to prove that a miracle is impossible, Lucia observed quietly. What if instead you called to celebrate that a little boy has defied every limitation you placed on him? Because if this is real, Caroline said slowly, her professional training warring with the evidence before her eyes, it means we've been wrong about Tommy's condition for 3 years. It means we've limited a child who had capabilities we never bothered to explore. The room fell silent as the full weight of that realization settled over everyone present. If Tommy could walk, if he had always possessed more abilities than medical assessments indicated, then 3 years of limitations, specialized equipment, and managed expectations had been based on incomplete understanding. We followed standard protocols, Dr. Vaughn said defensively, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Our assessments were based on established medical knowledge about spina bifida. Your assessments were based on what you expected to find, Lucia replied gently. You looked for damage and limitations instead of potential and possibility. Tommy watched the adult conversation with the serious attention of a child learning that grown-ups could be wrong about important things. "Dr. Vaughn," he said quietly, "why did you tell Papa I couldn't walk?" The direct question from the child, whose future she had helped define, created a moment of devastating honesty. Dr. Vaughn looked at Tommy, really looked at him, and saw not a collection of medical limitations, but a remarkable little boy who had just proven that miracles were possible when love refused to accept defeat. "Because," she said slowly, her professional mask slipping to reveal something more human underneath, "I thought I knew what your body could do better than you did. I was wrong." "It's okay," Tommy replied with the generous forgiveness that children offered to adults who disappointed them. "Now you know better." But Caroline's reaction was different, more defensive and professionally threatened. "This doesn't change anything," she declared, her voice rising with agitation. "One afternoon of unusual activity doesn't negate 3 years of documented medical assessments." Tommy could be experiencing temporary neurological fluctuations that create the illusion of improved function. Or, Ben said with quiet authority, Tommy could be demonstrating that your documented assessments were inadequate from the beginning. "Mr. Hartwell, you're not qualified to make that determination," Caroline shot back, her professional pride wounded by the implication that she had missed something crucial. "Neither were you, apparently," Lucia replied with devastating simplicity. The confrontation escalated as Caroline's defensiveness collided with the undeniable evidence of Tommy's capabilities. "Mrs. Montenegro, your unauthorized interference has created a dangerous situation." Tommy could seriously injure himself attempting movements that are biomechanically impossible for his condition. "The only thing that's dangerous," Lucia replied with fierce protectiveness, "is convincing a child that his dreams are impossible when his body is proving they're not." "This ends now," Dr. Vaughn declared, regaining her professional composure. "Tommy requires immediate comprehensive evaluation in a controlled medical environment. Until we understand what's happening, he cannot be allowed to attempt walking or any other unauthorized activities." "No," Tommy said quietly, but his voice carried surprising authority. "Not going to hospital. Not going to stop walking." The simple refusal from a 3-year-old created a crisis that none of the adults had anticipated. Medical protocols demanded evaluation and control, but Tommy had just demonstrated that his body operated outside established protocols. "Tommy," Dr. Vaughn said firmly, "this isn't a choice you can make. Your father needs to." "His father needs to protect him from people who want to convince him he's broken when he's clearly not," Ben interrupted, his decision crystallizing with absolute clarity. "Mr. Hartwell," Dr. Vaughn warned, "refusing medical evaluation could be considered negligent parenting." The threat hung in the air like a sword, sharp with legal implications and professional authority. Ben realized that defending Tommy's progress might cost him custody, might result in court battles with medical experts, might destroy everything he had built to protect his son. But as he looked at Tommy sitting proudly on the couch, having just walked across a room that medical science insisted was impossible, Ben knew that some battles were worth fighting even when you might lose everything. "Then I guess I'm a negligent parent," he said quietly. "Because I'm not letting anyone convince my son that his miracles are medical mistakes." Sometimes standing up for what's right means standing against everyone who claims to know better. The confrontation ended with Dr. Vaughn and Caroline leaving under a cloud of professional outrage and legal threats. Their final words echoed through the house like thunder. Mandatory evaluation, protective services, medical negligence. Ben stood at the living room window, watching their taillights disappear into the Seattle evening, knowing that everything had changed irreversibly. Tommy sat quietly on the couch, his small body exhausted from the emotional strain of defending his newfound abilities against adults who insisted they were impossible. The joy of his breakthrough had been tainted by the harsh reality that miracles could be more threatening than inspirational to people who had built careers on managing limitations. "Papa." Tommy's voice was small, uncertain. "Did I do something bad?" Ben turned from the window, his heart breaking at the worry in his son's eyes. "No, Tommy. You did something amazing. You showed us what courage looks like." "But the doctors were angry." "The doctors were scared," Lucia said gently, settling beside Tommy on the couch. "Sometimes when grown-ups are wrong about something important, They get angry instead of admitting they made mistakes. Ben's phone buzzed with an incoming text message. His stomach clenched as he read the sender. Janet Cooper, his assistant. But the message wasn't about business. Ben, Dr. Vaughn called the office looking for you. She mentioned concerns about Tommy's care and said something about protective services. Is everything okay? Call me if you need legal support. Janet. The words hit Ben like ice water. Dr. Vaughn wasn't just professionally embarrassed by Tommy's breakthrough. She was actively working to undermine Ben's custody by framing his support for Tommy's progress as medical negligence. What is it? Lucia asked, noticing Ben's expression. Ben showed her the message, watching her face pale as she read the implications. Protective Services investigations could result in Tommy being removed from the home, placed in medical custody where his newfound abilities would be suppressed in favor of proper medical management. They can't take him away for walking, Lucia said, but her voice carried uncertainty. They can if they convince a judge that allowing him to walk constitutes medical neglect, Ben replied grimly. Dr. Vaughn has 30 years of medical credentials. I have one afternoon of witnessed miracles. Tommy listened to this exchange with the grave attention of a child learning that adult decisions could tear apart everything he loved. Lucia going away? He asked quietly. The question forced Ben to confront another devastating reality. His employment of Lucia had triggered this crisis. Protecting Tommy might require choosing between his son's physical miracle worker and his legal guardian status. I don't know, buddy, Ben admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Lucia stood abruptly, her decision crystallizing with painful clarity. I should go. What? Ben stared at her in shock. If I leave voluntarily, Dr. Vaughn's complaints lose their foundation. You can say you dismissed me as soon as you understood the medical concerns. Tommy keeps his home, you keep custody, and maybe over time you can find other ways to nurture his abilities. No, Tommy said with surprising firmness. Lucia stays. Sometimes people have to leave to protect the people they love, Lucia explained gently, though tears were gathering in her eyes. Ben watched this conversation with growing realization. Lucia was prepared to sacrifice her relationship with Tommy to protect him from medical retaliation. She would walk away from the miracle she had helped create to ensure that Tommy remained with his father. There has to be another way, Ben said desperately. There is, Lucia replied quietly. But it requires you to choose between safety and truth. Ben's phone rang, interrupting the moment. Janet Cooper's name appeared on the screen, and he answered with trembling fingers. Ben. Janet's voice was crisp with professional concern. I've been researching the legal implications of Dr. Vaughn's threats. We need to talk immediately. Can it wait until morning? No. Child Protective Services has protocols for medical negligence cases. If Dr. Vaughn files a formal complaint, they could remove Tommy from your home within 24 hours while conducting their investigation. Ben sank into a chair, the weight of impossible choices crushing down on him. What are our options? Limited. You could reinstate standard medical protocols immediately, dismiss Mrs. Montenegro, and hope that demonstrates compliance with medical authority. Or what? Or you could fight it. But fighting means depositions, court hearings, expert witnesses, and months of legal uncertainty while Tommy's placement is determined. Ben looked at his son, who was listening to every word with the intense focus of a child whose future was being decided by adults who weren't asking his opinion. What would you recommend? Ben asked. Professionally, comply with medical authority. It's the safest path to maintaining custody. And personally? Janet's voice softened. Personally, I saw Tommy last month when you brought him to the office. He looked resigned, defeated. If what you're telling me is true, if he's really walking and engaged and happy, then maybe some risks are worth taking. After ending the call, Ben found himself alone with the two people who mattered most in his world, his son and the woman who had given his son hope. The choice before him felt impossibly stark. Choose safety and watch Tommy return to medical management and emotional withdrawal, or choose possibility and risk losing everything. Papa, Tommy said quietly, what's Protective Services? Ben knelt beside the couch, meeting his son's eyes at his level. They're people who make sure children are safe and properly cared for.
Am I not safe?
You're completely safe. But some people think that letting you walk might be dangerous. Tommy considered this with 3-year-old logic. Walking feels safe. Sitting in chair all day feels scary. The simple truth of that statement crystallized Ben's decision. His son had spent 3 years trapped not just by physical limitations, but by the emotional imprisonment of lowered expectations. Tommy's breakthrough wasn't just about walking, it was about believing in himself, engaging with the world, and discovering that his body contained possibilities no one had bothered to explore. "Lucia," Ben said, turning to face her, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." She nodded, though her eyes showed the pain of someone preparing to say goodbye. "If we fight this, if we defend Tommy's right to explore his capabilities despite medical opposition, will you stay? Will you help us prove that what we've witnessed is real and valuable and worth protecting?"
"Mr. Hartwell." "Ben," he corrected. "Will you stay, Lucia?"
She looked at Tommy, who was watching her with desperate hope, then back at Ben, who was offering her something she had never expected: the chance to be part of a family that chose love over safety.
"The legal risks are mine to take," Ben said firmly.
"Tommy chose you as his miracle worker. I'm choosing you as family. The question is whether you'll choose us back." Lucia's answer came not in words, but in action. She moved to sit beside Tommy on the couch, taking his small hand in hers with gentle certainty. "I choose both of you," she said softly. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Tommy's smile could have powered the city.
"We stay together?"
"We stay together," Ben confirmed, his decision made with absolute finality. "And tomorrow we start building the legal case that proves miracles are worth defending." The evening stretched ahead of them, full of phone calls to attorneys, research into medical precedents, and preparation for a battle that would test everything they believed about Tommy's potential. But for the first time since Rebecca's death, Ben felt like he was fighting for something instead of just managing loss. "What happens if we lose?" Lucia asked quietly. "Then we lose fighting for what's right instead of surrendering to what's convenient," Ben replied. "And Tommy grows up knowing that we believed in him enough to risk everything."
"And if we win?"
"Then Tommy gets to show the world that sometimes children know more about their own capabilities than the experts who are supposed to help them." As Seattle settled into night around them, the Hartwell house buzzed with planning and possibility. Phone calls were made to legal experts who specialized in medical rights cases. Research began into precedents for challenging medical authority. Networks were activated to find allies in the fight ahead. But more importantly, Tommy practiced walking. With Lucia's patient support and Ben's amazed encouragement, he took step after careful step across the living room, building strength and confidence with every movement. 5 steps, Tommy announced proudly after his best attempt yet. "Tomorrow?" Ben asked. "Tomorrow, 6 steps," Tommy replied with the determination of a child who had learned that impossible was just another word for not yet. The battle ahead would be fierce, expensive, and uncertain. Medical authority would array against parental instinct, professional credentials against witnessed miracles, established protocols against revolutionary possibility. But in this moment, watching his son walk across the room with increasing confidence while the woman who had made it possible provided gentle encouragement, Ben knew they had already won the only victory that truly mattered. They had chosen hope over fear, love over limitation, and the courage to defend miracles even when the world insisted they were impossible. Some choices define not just our future, but our souls. The morning sun streamed through the living room windows of the Hartwell mansion, illuminating a scene that would have been impossible to imagine just 8 weeks earlier. Tommy Hartwell, now 3.5 years old, walked confidently across the hardwood floor carrying his favorite book about the little engine that could. His gait was steady, his balance sure, and his face radiated the joy of a child who had discovered that his body could accomplish miracles.
"Dad, look!"
Tommy called out, placing the book carefully on the coffee table before walking back to where Ben sat reviewing legal documents. 12 steps without holding anything. Ben looked up from his papers, his face breaking into the proud smile that had become as natural as breathing over the past 2 months.
12 steps?
That's a new record. Tomorrow I'll try 15, Tommy announced with the confident determination that had carried him through weeks of legal battles, medical evaluations, and media attention. Lucia emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of fresh coffee and Tommy's morning snacks. At 28, she had grown into her role as Tommy's specialized caregiver with grace and professional confidence. The yellow dress she had worn as a nervous housekeeper had been replaced by comfortable dark jeans and a soft blue sweater that spoke of someone who belonged in this house, in this family. 15 steps sounds perfect, she agreed, setting down the tray and watching Tommy demonstrate his walking for the 100th time that week with undiminished wonder. The legal battle had been every bit as fierce as Ben had predicted. Dr. Vaughn had filed formal complaints with Child Protective Services, alleging medical negligence and endangerment. For 6 weeks, the Hartwell family had lived under investigation, with social workers conducting home visits, court-appointed medical experts performing evaluations, and media outlets covering the story of a millionaire father who chose his housekeeper's judgment over medical authority. But truth had a power that even legal proceedings couldn't suppress. Independent neurological specialists brought in by the court had confirmed what Lucia had observed from the beginning. Tommy's spinal defect affected his lower extremities differently than standard medical assessments had indicated. The nerve pathways that controlled his leg muscles were impaired but not severed, weakened but not absent. More importantly, Tommy himself had been the star witness in his own case. When Judge Patricia Morrison asked him directly about his walking abilities during the custody hearing, Tommy had stood up in the courtroom and walked from the witness chair to his father's table, demonstrating his capabilities with such natural confidence that even Dr. Vaughn's expert witnesses had been forced to acknowledge that their previous assessments had been incomplete. The court finds, Judge Morrison had ruled 3 weeks ago, that a child's demonstrated abilities supersede theoretical medical limitations. While medical expertise is crucial in determining appropriate care, it cannot be used to suppress capabilities that the child clearly possesses. The ruling had made national news, establishing legal precedent for parental rights to pursue therapeutic approaches that challenged medical orthodoxy when those approaches produced measurable positive results. Now, as Tommy practiced his walking with the casual confidence of any other child, the crisis felt like a distant memory. But the transformation went far beyond Tommy's physical abilities. Ben closed his laptop and moved to sit on the floor beside his son, something that would have been unthinkable during his emotionally distant days as a traveling executive. "What do you want to do today, buddy?" "Go to the park," Tommy replied immediately. "Want to show the ducks my walking." 2 months ago, outings to the park had required medical equipment, careful positioning, and constant supervision. Now they were simple adventures that Tommy approached with the enthusiasm of any 3-year-old eager to explore the world. "The park sounds perfect," Ben agreed. "But first, we have someone special coming to visit." Tommy's eyes lit up with curiosity. "Who?" "Dr. McLean," Lucia explained, referring to the pediatric rehabilitation specialist who had become Tommy's new primary physician. Unlike Dr. Vaughn, who had focused exclusively on managing limitations, Dr. McLean approached Tommy's care with a philosophy of exploring possibilities within safe parameters. "Is she bringing more exercises?" Tommy asked eagerly. "Probably," Ben laughed. "You know how much she likes seeing what new things you can do." The doorbell rang at precisely 10 o'clock, and Ben opened it to find Dr. Maria McLean carrying her usual bag of assessment tools and therapeutic equipment. But unlike the clinical visits of the past, these sessions felt more like celebrations of progress than medical evaluations. "Good morning, Tommy," Dr. McLean said warmly as she entered the living room. "I hear you've been working on longer walking distances." 12 steps this morning, Tommy announced proudly, immediately demonstrating his achievement. Dr. McLean watched with professional appreciation and personal wonder. In her 15 years of pediatric rehabilitation, she had never seen a case quite like Tommy's. Not because his medical condition was unique, but because his approach to overcoming it was so refreshingly focused on possibility rather than limitation. "Excellent form," she observed, making notes on her tablet. "Your balance has improved significantly since our last visit." "Lucia helps me practice every day," Tommy explained, reaching for Lucia's hand with the casual affection that had developed between them. Dr. McLean turned to Lucia with the respect that one professional shows another. "Your intuitive approach to Tommy's physical therapy has been remarkable. Have you considered formal training in pediatric rehabilitation?" The suggestion wasn't entirely unexpected. Over the past month, several medical professionals had recognized that Lucia's natural understanding of childhood development and healing possessed a quality that couldn't be taught in textbooks. "I've been thinking about it," Lucia admitted. "Tommy's progress has shown me how much I love helping children discover their own capabilities." "The University of Washington has an excellent program," Dr. McLean continued. "With your demonstrated success with Tommy as a foundation, you'd be an exceptional candidate." Ben felt a moment of panic at the thought of Lucia leaving to pursue formal education, but when he looked at Tommy's trusting face, he realized that supporting Lucia's professional growth was another way of honoring the miracle she had helped create. "If that's something you want to pursue," Ben said carefully, "we'll figure out how to make it work." "I wouldn't leave Tommy," Lucia said immediately. "But maybe there's a way to study while continuing his care. Maybe I could help other children too." Dr. McLean smiled. Part-time programs exist specifically for working professionals. And honestly, having someone with your practical experience in the classroom would benefit other students tremendously. The conversation was interrupted by Tommy tugging on Dr. McLean's sleeve. "Want to see me run?" "Running?" Dr. McLean raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Just a little," Tommy said modestly. "Lucia says my legs are getting stronger every day." What happened next exceeded even Dr. McLean's optimistic expectations. Tommy positioned himself at one end of the living room, took a deep breath, and began moving faster than his usual careful walk. It wasn't quite a run by typical standards, but it was undeniably more than walking. A coordinated, purposeful movement that covered the distance with speed and control. "Incredible," Dr. McLean murmured, documenting the moment on her tablet. 6 months ago, this child was considered permanently wheelchair-dependent. 6 months ago, nobody asked him what he thought he could do, Lucia replied simply. The morning evaluation continued with Dr. McLean testing Tommy's strength, balance, and coordination through games and exercises that felt more like play than medical assessment. Every measurement showed continued improvement. Every test revealed capabilities that expanded beyond previous limitations. "I need to ask you something, Tommy," Dr. McLean said as the session concluded. "Would you be willing to help me teach other doctors about children like you?" Tommy considered this with the seriousness he brought to all important questions. "What would I do?" "Show them how you walk and run. Tell them how it feels when grown-ups believe you can do things instead of telling you that you can't." "Will it help other kids walk too?" "It might. It might help doctors understand that children's bodies can surprise us when we give them the chance." Tommy looked at Lucia, then at his father, seeking the approval that had become the foundation of his confidence. Both adults nodded encouragingly. "Okay," Tommy agreed. "I'll help other kids." As Dr. McLean prepared to leave, she pulled Ben aside for a private conversation. "Mr. Hartwell, I want you to understand something. What's happened with Tommy isn't just about his physical progress. The confidence he's gained, the joy he shows in movement, the way he approaches challenges, these psychological benefits are as important as his improved mobility." "I'm beginning to understand that," Ben replied. "The legal battle you fought wasn't just about walking. It was about a child's right to reach for his full potential instead of accepting artificial limitations. You've changed how medical professionals in this city think about possibility." Ben looked through the window at Tommy, who was now practicing his running in the backyard with Lucia's patient encouragement. "Lucia changed everything," he said quietly. "I just learned to trust what she saw. And that trust has given Tommy something more valuable than walking. It's given him the belief that he can overcome anything if he's willing to try." After Dr. McLean left, the afternoon settled into the comfortable rhythm that had become their new normal. Tommy practiced his physical exercises with the enthusiasm of a child who loved discovering what his body could do. Lucia guided his activities with the expert intuition that had first recognized his potential. And Ben participated fully in his son's development instead of hiding behind business obligations and emotional distance. As evening approached, they gathered in the living room for Tommy's favorite time of day, story reading. But tonight, instead of having a story read to him, Tommy had something different in mind. "I want to tell you a story," he announced, positioning himself standing in front of the couch where Ben and Lucia sat together. "What kind of story?" Ben asked. About a little boy who learned to walk because someone believed he could. Tommy's story was simple but profound, told in the straightforward language of a 3-year-old who had lived through extraordinary circumstances. He spoke about being scared that his legs were broken, about meeting Lucia who saw strength instead of weakness, about learning that grown-ups could be wrong about important things, and about discovering that his body was full of surprises when love replaced fear. As he spoke, Tommy unconsciously demonstrated his progress, shifting his weight from foot to foot, taking small steps for emphasis, moving with the natural confidence that had replaced years of careful positioning and medical restriction. And then, Tommy concluded his story, the little boy realized that walking was just the beginning, because when people believe in you, you can do anything. The words hung in the air like a benediction, summarizing not just Tommy's journey but the transformation of their entire family. Later that evening, after Tommy had fallen asleep in his bed with the same ease that characterized all his activities now, Ben and Lucia sat together on the couch, planning the future that had become possible because of their shared faith in miracles. The University of Washington acceptance letter came today, Lucia said quietly, pulling the envelope from her purse. Ben felt his heart skip. And I got in. Full scholarship for the pediatric rehabilitation program. That's wonderful, Ben said, and meant it despite his fear of change. Ben, Lucia said softly, I need to ask you something. Anything. These past 2 months, taking care of Tommy, being part of your family, it's shown me something I didn't expect to find again. What's that? Love, she said simply. Not just love for Tommy, though I adore him, but love for you. For the man who chose to fight for his son's dreams instead of accepting defeat. Ben turned to face her fully, seeing in her eyes the same wonder he felt every time he watched Tommy walk across the room. I love you too, he said, the words carrying the weight of transformation and hope. You gave me back my son, and you gave me back the ability to believe in impossible things. So what happens now? Now, Ben said, taking her hands in his. We build a future where Tommy gets to keep discovering what he's capable of, where you get to help other children find their own miracles, and where we get to be a family that proves love really can conquer anything. Outside, Seattle sparkled under a canopy of winter stars, unaware that in one house overlooking Puget Sound, 3 people had discovered that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't medical science or legal authority or social expectation. It was the simple, revolutionary act of believing that children contain infinities of possibility when love refuses to accept limitations. Tommy Hartwell was walking, running, and reaching for dreams that everyone had once declared impossible. And in the morning, he would wake up ready to discover what new miracles awaited a little boy whose family had learned that hope, properly nurtured, could bloom into realities that changed the world. Sometimes the greatest victory is having the courage to keep running when everyone says you can't even walk. 8 months later, the graduation ceremony at the University of Washington School of Medicine buzzed with excitement as Dr. Maria McLean stepped to the podium to deliver the keynote address. In the audience, Ben Hartwell adjusted his tie nervously while Tommy, now 4 years old, sat quietly beside him wearing his best blue button-down shirt. Today, Dr. McLean began, I want to talk about a case that changed how our medical community approaches pediatric rehabilitation. On the large screen behind her, a video began playing, Tommy walking confidently across a playground, then breaking into his characteristic careful run toward the camera. The audience of medical students, residents, and practicing physicians watched in fascination. 8 months ago, this child was considered permanently wheelchair-dependent due to spina bifida. Today, he runs, climbs playground equipment, and recently started swimming lessons. Ben felt Tommy's small hand slip into his as they watched themselves on the big screen. In the front row, Lucia Montenegro Hartwell, she had officially taken Ben's name after their courthouse wedding 3 months earlier, smiled proudly at her husband and stepson. The transformation wasn't achieved through revolutionary medical technology or experimental procedures, Dr. McLean continued. It happened because one caregiver chose to see potential instead of limitations, and one father chose to trust love over fear. The video switched to show Lucia working with Tommy in their living room, her gentle hands guiding his movements while her voice encouraged his efforts. Then Ben appeared on screen, kneeling beside his son as Tommy took his first independent steps. Dr. Vaughn, who had been Tommy's original physician, has since retired from active practice, Dr. McLean explained, addressing one of the questions that had followed the case. She now serves as a consultant for cases where traditional assessments may need re-evaluation. Her experience with Tommy's case has led to important discussions about the limitations of standard diagnostic protocols. In the audience, several medical professionals shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the professional humility required to acknowledge such a significant oversight. Caroline Reed, Tommy's former physical therapist, has retrained in pediatric developmental therapy and now works specifically with children whose conditions may have been incompletely assessed. She credits Tommy's case with teaching her to look beyond medical charts to see the whole child. The screen now showed recent footage of Tommy at his new preschool, Bright Futures Academy, a program designed for children with diverse abilities. He moved through classroom activities with confidence, his slight gait difference barely noticeable as he played with other children who accepted his abilities without question. Helen Foster, Tommy's former nurse, returned to Seattle after her mother's recovery and now serves as care coordinator for our new Pediatric Potential program, an initiative that reassesses children with developmental diagnoses to identify previously overlooked capabilities. Ben smiled, remembering Helen's tearful reunion with Tommy 2 months ago. She had apologized repeatedly for not seeing his potential earlier, but Tommy had simply hugged her and asked if she wanted to see his new running technique. The legal precedent established by Hartwell v. Seattle Children's Medical Group has resulted in 14 similar cases nationwide where children's demonstrated abilities have superseded medical limitations, Dr. McLean continued. The Tommy Protocol, as it's become known, now requires that any long-term developmental assessment include observation of the child in non-clinical environments with caregivers who know them intimately. The presentation shifted to show statistics and research data, but Ben's attention was drawn to Tommy, who was fidgeting with the excitement of a 4-year-old who had been sitting still too long. "Papa," Tommy whispered. "When do I get to talk?" "Soon, buddy," Ben whispered back. "Remember what we practiced?" Tommy nodded solemnly. After Dr. McLean's presentation, he would be introduced to the medical audience, not as a patient, but as a teacher whose experience had changed how doctors approached pediatric care. Lucia Montenegro Hartwell, Dr. McLean continued, completed her pediatric rehabilitation degree last month with highest honors. Her thesis, Intuitive Assessment in Childhood Development, is now required reading in our program. She has established the Montenegro Foundation, which trains caregivers to recognize potential in children with developmental challenges. Lucia blushed at the recognition. The foundation, funded by Ben's technology company, had already trained over 200 caregivers in techniques that prioritized possibility over limitation. But perhaps most importantly, Dr. McLean said, her voice growing warmer, Tommy's story reminds us that healing happens in the space between clinical assessment and human love. Medical science gives us tools, but children teach us how to use them. The presentation concluded with current footage of Tommy at home, running through the backyard sprinkler system, climbing his new jungle gym, and reading stories to his baby sister, Elena, who had been born 3 months earlier without any developmental complications. Tommy's case has fundamentally changed our understanding of spina bifida outcomes, Dr. McLean concluded. Not because we discovered new medical techniques, but because we learned to listen when children tell us what they're capable of achieving. As applause filled the auditorium, Tommy stood up in his seat, his face beaming with pride at seeing his story help other children. When Dr. McLean introduced him to speak, Tommy walked confidently to the podium, which had been adjusted to his height. The medical professionals fell silent as this remarkable little boy prepared to address them. "Hi," Tommy said into the microphone, his voice clear and strong. "I'm Tommy Hartwell, and I want to tell you about walking." He paused, gathering his thoughts with the seriousness he brought to important conversations. "Before Lucia came to my house, everyone told me my legs were broken. But they weren't broken, they were just sleeping. Lucia helped them wake up by believing they could work." The audience listened with rapt attention as Tommy continued his simple but profound explanation. "Now I help other kids wake up their sleeping parts. My mama Lucia and I visit hospitals and show kids that grown-ups can be wrong about what's impossible." He looked directly at the audience of medical professionals with the confident eye contact that had developed alongside his physical abilities. "I think doctors should ask kids what they think they can do before deciding what they can't do. Because kids know things about their bodies that computers can't measure." The wisdom in those words, delivered with 4-year-old directness, created a moment of profound silence in the auditorium. Also, Tommy added with a grin, if you believe kids can do amazing things, they usually will. That's what my papa learned, and that's what my mama Lucia taught everyone. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes, but Tommy's attention had already shifted to more important matters. Papa, he said as Ben lifted him down from the podium, can we go home now? Elena's probably missing her big brother. As they walked out of the medical school together, Ben carrying his briefcase, Lucia adjusting her graduation cap, and Tommy skipping between them, they represented something that had seemed impossible 8 months earlier. A family united by love, strengthened by adversity, and committed to proving that miracles happened when people refused to accept limitations. Ben's technology company now operated on a flexible schedule that prioritized family time. The quarterly business trips had been replaced by daily involvement in Tommy's development and Elena's early milestones. Success, he had learned, was measured not in stock prices but in children's laughter and the confidence to chase impossible dreams. The Hartwell family had become advocates for pediatric rights, speaking at medical conferences and supporting legislation that required second opinions for children with developmental diagnoses. Their story had inspired dozens of families to challenge limiting assessments and explore their children's true potential. But on this sunny Seattle afternoon, as they drove home through the city where their miracle had begun, they were simply a family grateful for the courage to believe in love over limitation, hope over fear, and the infinite possibilities that bloomed when children were allowed to dream without boundaries. Tommy fell asleep in his car seat, exhausted from his big day of teaching doctors. In his dreams, he was running. Not the careful, measured movements that had amazed medical professionals, but the free, joyous running of a child who had learned that the only real disability was the failure to believe in miracles. And in the front seat, Ben and Lucia held hands and planned tomorrow's adventures, knowing that their greatest achievement wasn't Tommy's walking. It was creating a family where love conquered every limitation and every day brought new possibilities to explore. The boy who wasn't supposed to walk was now teaching the world to run toward hope. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.